let's talk about this Uniswap thing. Karma comes back. Karma's a bitch. Karma comes back around. Uniswap Labs. So when everything happens with the corrupt SEC suing Richard Hart and somehow suing blockchain entities as well, Uniswap takes it upon themselves to delist HEX, so you can't trade it on their platform anymore, and it just disappears. When we know that they are already in bed with a lot of these organizations and are corrupt scum themselves, really, and you shouldn't use Uniswap as a DEX. I would use CalSwap if you can, or really anything else. But they now receive a Wells notice from the SEC, which is very interesting indeed. Not that we're rooting for that, but it's interesting to see these kind of things happen when you don't take a stance in the market prior. Richard Hart actually tweeted about it. It was the first news I saw about it was from him. He tweeted about them getting a Wells notice, notifying that the SEC is about to sue them as well. When will people realize that Richard is correct, that everyone I'm trying to read my notes here that I don't remember writing. Okay. So it isn't just him that is having the SEC come after him. It's the industry right now. Like, we all do know that, I think. We've seen the XRP thing. We know that the SEC is just throwing everything at a wall and seeing what sticks. It comes after Richard Hart. It's like, oh, because some people don't like Richard Hart. It's like, I don't really give a shit about that one. But they just keep coming after people, and they're not going to stop. So I'm just wondering when, from the Richard Hart angle of it, people are going to realize that. But to a point that you mentioned, Ewok, I mean, will Uniswap remove the Uni token now that, like they did HEX, now that they are, since they're in bed with Gensler, but also being, taken on by him. So in a way, is this kind of just like misery loves company for, not that we're in misery, but I mean, like for people that are dealing with the SEC, just like, Uniswap, look what happened to you guys. Like, we just like it because of that reason. Or is this really an opportunity, though, to band together and say, hey, you may have shit on us, you may have censored us multiple times in the past and whenever this SEC stuff happened, but it's time for us to let bygones be bygones and try to fight this fight together. I mean, what's kind of your attitude on that?
Yeah, I think that's the way it'll, eventually play out. I do believe that Richard is the bigger man in this situation, literally, but no.
Well, I mean, Hayden Adams is a very, if you want to talk about like kind of a small soy type, individual.
No, I know.
Yeah, Richard literally is bigger than him. But anyway, go ahead.
I think it'll play out that way. You're gonna have the influencers that are like, screw you guys. This is karma coming back to bite you in the ass for what happened, and completely get it. I would not. Well, at this point, it doesn't really matter. We do have other options, but I think it'll play out in favor of Uniswap, because if we can kind of get this ball rolling first, Richard wants to protect people. He's always been out to protect people, whether they come at him or not. You know what I mean? I think, he wants to be that saving grace. He wants to be known for doing that. And I think the precedent that gets set in his case will definitely impact the one for Uniswap. So if those guys are smart, they'll pay attention and eventually come around. Well, will they relist HEX or delist Uni? I doubt either one of those will happen right away anyway. We'll have to kind of probably see as far as a ruling goes until that happens. But I think it's one of those, what's good for everybody isn't always good for me kind of things. And, they're not going to punish themselves and their own token just to prove a point. It's not going to happen. Although they should, but it won't happen.
Definitely not.
Now, I know even when they delisted it kind of from their front end, we had other workarounds because I think there's still liquidity pairs on Uniswap for it. So I don't know if they've all been disabled. I know ethhex.com worked for quite some time. But I recently looked for that and couldn't find it. It didn't work or didn't load. So I don't know if there are any other front ends out there for Uniswap. You can't really remove it if there are liquidity pools that are there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, it's there. It's just kind of hard to access. You have to build your own custom front end. I do know Alex from Hedron had the one. I forget. I don't totally even forget what the link was for that, but
It's
there were
just
ways.
if you go to Hedron, yeah, if you just go to hedron.pro, I was just
I think
trying
it
to
was
do it from.
swap.hedron.pro.
Yeah, yeah. Either way, it was basically the swap feature on the Hedron website. Is a workaround you could have done. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's still working or not. So it'd be something interesting to check. But either way, I think it all plays out in their favor. Where, like I said, we get a ruling for the our ecosystem's case, and I do think that the precedent that gets set will help them. Unless I'm totally reading this the wrong way, I think things will go in our favor eventually, which will cause them to have some legs to stand on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be worried about Uniswap. I mean, I'm not worried about anybody that's in the crosshairs of the
Mm.
SEC because I don't think any judge really looks at anything that the SEC is doing is as legitimate. But yeah, I wouldn't be worried about Uniswap. I think they'll turn out just fine. If anything, though, like you, Ewok, I just hope they learn a lesson here. I just want them to
Yeah.
learn a lesson that it's like, oh, okay, you cuddle up with the big boys and stuff like that and think that they're your friends, and then they just take you out back and shoot you in the back of the head.
Yep.
Let that be a lesson to you. What are you actually in this for? So, and it's just funny to see the bankless boys and everybody come after, the support of Uniswap right now. But if it happens to anybody else, it happens to Richard Hart or whatever, thank you, SEC, for doing your job. Finally, you go after somebody who deserves it. It's
Sounds
just,
like their estrogen peeled off onto you there for a second.
well, I was that was my imitation
I know.
of, I don't remember their names. They
I
remind
don't
me of
care to learn them.
they remind me of the South Park had an episode a few years ago of the Hardy Boys. Was an old, like, they were two like spy guys. My dad
They were
actually used to read their
detectives.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. My dad read their books back in the day, and they called them the Hardley Boys on South Park. And I'm not going to go into too many details of that episode, but the clue goo is flying, and that's what the Bankless Boys remind me of. So shout out anybody in the chat if you remember the Hardley Boys episode of South Park. Just do me a favor and type in clue goo in the chat. I appreciate it. All right, so that's what's going on with Uniswap. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. I don't think there's anything to worry about there at all. I think the SEC is basically an entity that we could ignore at this point. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So
No one cares.